Appalachian foothills, spring of 1876. The transaction took less than 5 minutes. 17-year-old Clara Whitmore watched her father count $3 silver into his palm, inspect the mule's teeth, and nod with satisfaction. She stood barefoot in the mud, her only possessions tied in a flour sack, while two men decided her future like she was livestock being traded at market. What she didn't know was that the mountain man with cold gray eyes and a reputation for violence would teach her that worth isn't something others assign to you, it's something you claim for yourself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started with her father's hand on her shoulder, shaking her awake before dawn. "Get up, Clara, we're going to town." She'd risen from the pile of straw that served as her bed in the corner of their one-room cabin, pulled on her only dress, faded calico with patches on the patches, and followed him into the pre-dawn darkness without question. Asking questions had stopped being worth the effort years ago, around the time her mother died and her father discovered that whiskey was cheaper than grief. The walk to Ashford took 2 hours. Her father, Silas Whitmore, didn't speak except to curse when he stumbled on the rutted path. Clara walked 3 steps behind, carrying the empty grain sack he'd shoved at her when they left. She didn't know what it was for. She'd learned not to ask. Ashford was barely a town, more a collection of buildings huddled around a crossroads where mountain trappers came down to trade pelts for supplies. A general store, a blacksmith, a rough tavern that doubled as a trading post, and a scattering of cabins occupied by people who preferred isolation to civilization. Her father led her straight to the tavern. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed men and stale beer. 3 trappers sat at a corner table, their furs piled beside them. Her father's eyes fixed on one man in particular, broad-shouldered, bearded, wearing buckskins dark with age and use. "That's Mackenzie," her father muttered, more to himself than to her. "They say he's got more silver than sense, living up in those mountains alone." The man called Mackenzie didn't look up as they approached. He was cleaning his rifle with methodical precision, his movements practiced and unhurried. "Mackenzie," her father said, his voice taking on the wheedling tone that made Clara's stomach turn. "Heard you might be looking for help up at your place." Mackenzie's hands stilled on the rifle. He looked up slowly, his gray eyes moving from Silas to Clara with an expression that gave nothing away. "Didn't say that." "Well, see, I got a situation." Silas pushed Clara forward slightly. "Got this girl here, strong worker, can cook, clean, tend animals. You're up there alone, must get lonely. Could use someone to keep house." Clara felt her face burn. She knew what her father was suggesting, what he was offering. She'd heard stories about mountain men who took women, bought them, stolen them, claimed them through various means, both legal and not. Mackenzie's gaze settled on her face. His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes shifted. "How old?" 17, her father said quickly. "Old enough for whatever you need." "That's not what I asked." Mackenzie's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that made Silas step back slightly. Clara found her voice for the first time. "I'm 17, be 18 come August." Mackenzie studied her for a long moment. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to not look away or down like a beaten dog. If she was being sold, she'd at least face it with whatever dignity remained to her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara Whitmore." "You want to come work for me, Clara Whitmore?" The question surprised her. No one had asked what she wanted. In so long, she'd almost forgotten people could. "Does it matter what I want?" Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "It matters to me." Her father interrupted, impatient. "Now look here, we ain't got time for chit-chat. You want her or not? I'll take $3 in that mule you got tied outside. That's fair trade." Clara felt something inside her break and reform in a different shape. $3 and a mule. That's what her father thought she was worth. Less than the cost of a decent horse, less than he'd probably spend on whiskey in a month. Mackenzie looked at Silas with something close to contempt. "You're selling your daughter. I'm offering a business arrangement. She needs a place. You need help. I'm just the middleman making sure everyone benefits." "Everyone except her." Silas's face darkened. "You want her or not?" "Because I got other interested parties." Clara doubted that was true, but Mackenzie couldn't know it. He looked at her again, and this time she saw something in his expression that looked almost like pity, though it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "I'll take her," he said finally, "but not for $3 and a mule." Her father's eyes lit up. $5 then, and I'll give you the mule, that's all. You don't deserve more for selling your own blood." The tavern had gone quiet. The other trappers watched with interest. Even the barkeeper had stopped wiping glasses to listen. Silas's face flushed red. "Now you listen here." Mackenzie stood. He wasn't exceptionally tall, but he was built solid as an oak tree, and there was something in the way he moved that suggested violence was always an available option. "I said I'll give you the mule. You'll take it and be grateful I don't break your jaw for treating your daughter like property." For a moment, Clara thought her father would argue, would push back, would do something. Instead, he looked at the mule, visible through the open door, at Mackenzie's expression, and whatever he saw there made him deflate. "Fine, the mule. But she's your problem now. Don't come crying to me when she don't work out." "Won't be coming back your way at all," Mackenzie said flatly. Her father grabbed the mule's lead rope and was gone without another word to Clara, without a goodbye or a backward glance. She watched him leave, feeling nothing. The grief of being abandoned by your last parent should have hurt more, but you can't mourn what you never really had. Mackenzie sat back down, returned to cleaning his rifle. "You can sit if you want." Clara sat, perching on the edge of the chair, across from him. She had questions, but didn't know which ones were safe to ask. After a moment, he spoke without looking up. "I live about 8 miles into the mountains. Got a cabin, a barn, chickens, a cow, some goats. I trap in winter, pan for gold in summer. It's isolated. Nearest neighbor is 4 miles down the mountain." "All right," she said, because some response seemed necessary. "I need help with the animals and the garden. The cabin needs keeping, cooking, basic things." He glanced at her. "But I won't touch you. You'll have your own space. You work, I provide food and shelter. That's the arrangement." Clara studied his face, looking for the lie, the catch, the hidden expectation. "Why? Why what? Why buy me just to not—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "I didn't buy you. I bought a mule and stopped your father from doing something worse with you." He set down the rifle, finally giving her his full attention. "I do need help. Running a mountain homestead alone is hard work, but I'm not looking for a wife or anything else. I'm looking for someone who can work and be trusted. If that's you, we'll get along fine." It was the strangest job offer Clara had ever received, though admittedly she'd never received any actual job offers before. "And if I say no," Mackenzie shrugged, "then I'll give you $2, all the cash I've got on me, and you can figure out your own path. But Clara, I'll be honest with you. A 17-year-old girl alone with $2 won't last long out here. Men aren't kind to women with no protection." She knew he was right. Ashford wasn't a place for unattached women. The few women here were either married or worked in the tavern in capacities that Clara's mother had warned her about before she died. "How long would I have to stay?" "Long as it suits us both. You want to leave, you leave. I won't stop you." It wasn't much of a choice, but it was more choice than she'd had an hour ago. "All right, I'll come work for you." He nodded once, stood, and shouldered his pack with easy strength. "We leave now. It's an 8-mile walk, and I want to be home before dark." Clara picked up her flour sack of possessions, 2 threadbare dresses, a comb missing half its teeth, and a small wooden horse her mother had carved for her years ago, and followed him out of the tavern into the morning light. The walk into the mountains was quiet. Mackenzie moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew every rock and root on the path. Clara struggled to keep up, her thin shoes offering little protection from the rough terrain. After the first mile, when she stumbled for the third time, he stopped and looked at her feet. "Those won't last a week up here. They're all I have." He pulled something from his pack, a pair of moccasins, worn but sturdy. "These were my wife's. She was about your size." Clara took them carefully. "Your wife? She died 3 years ago. Fever." He said it matter-of-factly, without emotion. "The clothes are still in the cabin. You can have what fits." "Thank you," Clara said quietly, pulling on the moccasins. They fit better than her shoes ever had. They continued climbing. The path grew steeper, the trees thicker. Clara had never been this far into the mountains. Her father's cabin sat at the foothills, barely qualifying as mountain territory. This was different, wild, untamed, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. "You ever lived in the mountains before?" Mackenzie asked. "No, just at the edge." "It's different up here, harder. Winters are brutal. Snow can trap you in the cabin for weeks. Springs bring mud and flooding. Summers are short. You'll need to learn fast if you're going to survive." "I learned quick," Clara said, and it was true. She'd had to. He glanced back at her, something approving in his expression. "Good, because I won't coddle you. Everyone pulls their weight on my mountain." His mountain. The possessiveness in the phrase was interesting, like he owned not just the land, but the entire territory. Maybe he did, in the way that mattered up here, through strength and reputation and the willingness to defend what was his. They walked in silence for another hour. Clara's legs burned from the climbing, but she didn't complain. Complaining had never helped with her father. She doubted it would help with Mackenzie. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Clara saw the cabin. It was bigger than she'd expected. Actual logs, chinked with mud, a stone chimney, real glass in the windows. A barn sat behind it, sturdy and well-maintained. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard. A garden plot showed the first green shoots of spring planting. A creek ran nearby, its water clear and cold-looking. It was, Clara thought with surprise, almost beautiful. Certainly better than anything she'd lived in before. "Home," Mackenzie said simply. He led her to the cabin, pushed open the door. The interior was neat, obsessively so. Everything had its place. A table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves lined with supplies, herbs hanging from the rafters, a rifle rack on the wall, and in the corner a bed with actual blankets. "That was our bed," Mackenzie said, gesturing to it. "You'll sleep there. I'm building a loft for myself. Should be done by weeks. And until then, I'll sleep in the barn." Clara stared at him. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. I told you you'd have your own space. I meant it." He moved to a chest against the wall, opened it. "Sarah's clothes. Take what you need." The clothes were simple but clean. Dresses, a heavy wool coat, undergarments, even a pair of boots. More clothing than Clara had ever owned in her life. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just put them to good use." He moved toward the door. "I'll show you around, where everything is, what needs doing. You'll start tomorrow. Tonight, just settle in." He left her alone in the cabin. Clara stood in the center of the room, her flour sack clutched in her hands, and tried to understand what had just happened to her life. This morning, she'd been her father's unwanted burden. Now she was... what? An employee? A servant? Something else entirely. She looked at the bed, at the chest of clothes, at the neat cabin with its stone hearth and glass windows. Whatever she was, wherever she'd ended up, it was already better than where she'd been. That would have to be enough for now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Clara woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, and for a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The trade, the walk, the mountain, Mackenzie. She rose quickly, smoothing down the dress she'd slept in, and stepped outside. Mackenzie was at the woodpile, his movements rhythmic and efficient. He'd already split what looked like half a cord. He noticed her but didn't stop working. There's cornmeal in the tin on the second shelf, eggs in the basket by the door, bacon's hanging in the smokehouse, that's the small building behind the barn, coffee's in the blue jar. Clara understood. He was telling her to make breakfast. She went back inside, found everything where he'd said, and set about cooking. Her hands knew the work even if her surroundings were unfamiliar. By the time Mackenzie came in, she had bacon sizzling, cornmeal mush bubbling, and coffee boiling in the pot. He washed at the basin, sat at the table without comment. Clara served him, then hesitated, unsure if she was supposed to eat with him or wait. "Sit," he said, nodding to the other chair. "We eat together. I'm not some lord in a manor house." She sat, taking small portions. The food was simple but plentiful, more than she'd typically eat in a day at her father's cabin. "You cook well," Mackenzie said after a few bites. "My mother taught me before she died." "How long ago?" 5 years. I was 12. He nodded, filing away the information. "And your father never remarried?" "He never wanted to. Said whiskey was cheaper and complained less." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. Mackenzie's expression hardened slightly. "A man who trades his daughter for a mule isn't much of a man at all." They finished eating in silence. Afterward, Mackenzie pushed back from the table. "I'll show you the routine. Morning chores first. Chickens need feeding and eggs collected. Goats need milking. Cow needs tending. Garden needs weeding this time of year. Afternoons you can work on indoor tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending. I'll handle the heavier work, chopping wood, repairs, hunting." The days developed a pattern. Clara rose at dawn, started the fire, prepared breakfast. After eating, she'd tend the animals while Mackenzie worked on whatever project demanded attention. Fixing fence line, clearing brush, checking his trap lines. Midday, they'd eat together, usually in silence. Afternoons, Clara worked in the garden or the cabin while Mackenzie disappeared into the woods, returning before dark with game or empty-handed. The work was hard but not cruel. Mackenzie expected competence but didn't berate her for mistakes. When she misjudged how much grain to give the chickens, he simply showed her the correct amount. When she scorched the beans, he ate them without complaint and suggested she watch the fire more carefully next time. He was teaching her, Clara realized, not through lengthy explanations but through brief demonstrations and practical experience. Within a week, she'd learned more about running a homestead than she'd known in 17 years. The loft was finished on the 6th day. Mackenzie moved his bedroll and few possessions up the ladder, leaving Clara the main room entirely. That night, lying in the bed that had belonged to his dead wife, Clara stared at the rafters and wondered what kind of man gave up comfort to keep a promise to a girl he'd bought for a mule. On the 10th day, Mackenzie brought home a deer. He dressed it behind the barn and Clara watched from a distance, studying his technique. When he noticed her watching, he didn't send her away. "Come here, you should know how to do this." She approached cautiously. He showed her how to skin the hide, where to make cuts, how to separate meat from bone without waste. His hands were stained red but steady, his instructions clear and patient. "Why are you teaching me this?" Clara asked. "Because if something happens to me, you'll need to survive on your own up here." He said it practically, without drama. "Can't do that if you only know how to cook what someone else provides." It was the most words he'd strung together since she'd arrived. Clara absorbed them along with the lesson, understanding that Mackenzie was offering her something her father never had, the tools for self-sufficiency. 2 weeks into her stay, a storm rolled in. Clara had never experienced mountain weather, the way clouds descended like living things, the way rain became a solid wall of water, thunder echoed off the peaks like cannon fire. She was in the garden when the first drops fell, racing to get inside before the deluge. Mackenzie appeared from the barn, soaked through, carrying an armload of firewood. "Storm settling in," he said, stacking wood by the hearth. "Could last days. We'll stay inside. Keep dry." The storm did last. 3 days of relentless rain that turned the world gray and dripping. Clara and Mackenzie were trapped in the cabin together, the forced proximity awkward at first. But Mackenzie seemed unbothered. He used the time to maintain his equipment, sharpening knives, oiling his rifle, mending a torn coat. Clara watched, then asked if she could help. He looked surprised, but handed her a whetstone and a hunting knife. Long strokes, consistent angle, feel for the burr. She worked carefully, concentrating. When she finished, he tested the edge and nodded approval. On the second day of rain, Clara found a book on the shelf, a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. She'd learned to read from her mother, though her father had thought it a waste of time for a girl. "You can read that if you want," Mackenzie said, noticing her interest. "I don't want to damage it." Books are meant to be read, not preserved like relics. He returned to his work. Sarah loved that one, read it so many times the spine cracked. It was the first time he'd volunteered information about his wife. Clara opened the book carefully, found Sarah's name written inside the cover in flowing script. She had beautiful handwriting, Clara said. She had a lot of beautiful qualities. Mackenzie's voice was neutral, but something in his stillness suggested old pain. She deserved better than dying in a cabin miles from anyone who could help. Clara understood then. The isolation he'd chosen, the solitary life. It wasn't preference. It was penance. "You couldn't have known she'd get sick," Clara said quietly. "Doesn't matter what I could or couldn't have known. She's still dead." He stood abruptly. "I'm checking the animals." He left despite the rain. Clara watched him cross to the barn, his shoulders hunched against the downpour, and understood that some grief didn't heal. It just got carried. When the storm finally broke, the world emerged scrubbed clean and vibrant. Clara worked in the garden, pulling weeds, marveling at how everything seemed greener, more alive. Mackenzie approached carrying something wrapped in cloth. "Made you something." She unwrapped it, a knife smaller than his hunting blades, with a carved wooden handle that fit her hand perfectly. "Every woman on a mountain needs her own knife," he said. "For kitchen work, garden work, protection if needed. This one's yours." Clara turned it over, seeing the care in its construction. "Thank you, I've never had anything made just for me." "Then it's overdue." He nodded toward the garden. "Beans are looking good. You've got a hand for growing things." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Clara returned to weeding with new energy, the knife tucked into her belt. A month into her stay, a stranger appeared, a grizzled trapper passing through to the lower towns. He stopped for water, his eyes lingering on Clara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Didn't know you had a woman up here, Mackenzie," the trapper said. "She works for me." Mackenzie's tone was flat, discouraging further conversation. "Pretty young thing." The trapper smiled, showing brown teeth. "You sharing?" Mackenzie's hand moved to his rifle with casual menace. "She's under my protection. That means hands off, eyes elsewhere, and any disrespect gets answered with violence. We clear?" The trapper's smile vanished. "Clear. Just making conversation." "Conversation's over. Take your water and move along." After the trapper left, Clara exhaled shakily. "Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency." Mackenzie checked his rifle, sliding it back into its rack. "But Clara, understand this. Up here, my reputation keeps you safe. People know I don't make empty threats. But if you leave this mountain, that protection ends. Men like him are everywhere, and most aren't afraid of consequences. I'm not planning to leave." He looked at her intently. "Ever? You're 17. You really want to spend your life on an isolated mountain?" Clara thought about her father's cabin, about Ashford, about the limited options available to young women with no family and no prospects. "This mountain's been kinder to me than anywhere else I've lived. Why would I leave?" Something shifted in Mackenzie's expression, surprise maybe, or the beginning of respect. All right then, if you're staying, you need to learn to shoot. That afternoon, he taught her to handle the rifle, how to load it, aim it, brace for the kick. She was terrible at first, flinching before pulling the trigger, missing targets by yards. "Stop thinking," Mackenzie said. "Trust your hands. The rifle's just a tool." By the 20th shot, she hit the stump he'd marked. By the 30th, she could hit it consistently. "Good," he said, the closest he came to praise. "Practice every day until it's instinct." Summer arrived suddenly, the way it did in the mountains. The garden exploded with growth, beans climbing poles, squash spreading across the ground, tomatoes hanging heavy on the vine. Clara worked in the heat, her skin browning, her hands developing calluses. She was growing stronger. The soft girl who'd arrived 2 months ago was being replaced by someone harder, more capable. She could milk the goats without assistance, slaughter a chicken without hesitation, track a deer through underbrush by reading bent grass and broken twigs. Mackenzie noticed the changes but said nothing, just adjusted his expectations accordingly. He sent her further into the woods to check snares, trusted her with more complex tasks, spoke to her less like a child and more like a partner. One evening, Clara prepared venison stew seasoned with herbs from the garden. Mackenzie ate 3 bowls. "This is exceptional," he said finally. "It's just stew. It's better than anything Sarah made, and she was a fine cook." He met her eyes. "You've become invaluable here, Clara. I want you to know that." The words lodged somewhere in her chest. Invaluable. Not worthless, not a burden, not worth only $3 and a mule. Invaluable. "I've never been valued before," she admitted quietly. "Then everyone before me was a fool." They sat in comfortable silence, the cabin warm with fire and food, and something that felt almost like belonging. That night, lying in bed, Clara realized she'd stopped thinking of this as temporary. Somewhere between morning chores and evening meals, between rifle practice and garden work, she'd stopped being Silas Whitmore's unwanted daughter and become someone else entirely. She'd become Clara, just Clara, and for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. August arrived with wildflowers carpeting the high meadows. Clara turned 18 on a Tuesday morning, marking the occasion silently while feeding the chickens. She hadn't expected anyone to remember. She'd mentioned it only once, months ago, during that first walk up the mountain, but when she returned to the cabin, Mackenzie was waiting with a small wooden box. "Happy birthday," he said, pushing it across the table. Clara opened it carefully. Inside lay a leather belt with a custom sheath for her knife, tooled with an intricate pattern of leaves and vines. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly representing hours of work. "You made this?" "Worked on it at night in the barn. Figured you deserved something that marked the day." He looked almost embarrassed. 18's important. Means you're fully grown, legally independent." "Legally independent," Clara repeated, testing the words. "I suppose I am." "Which means you're free to make your own choices now. Stay or go. It's entirely yours to decide." Clara studied his face, trying to read the meaning behind the statement. Was he asking her to leave, testing her commitment? She buckled the belt around her waist, feeling the weight of the knife settle against her hip. "I already told you I'm staying. That hasn't changed." Relief flickered across his features before he masked it. "Good, because there's something I want to teach you, but it requires trust." That afternoon, he led her deeper into the mountains than she'd ever ventured, past the trap lines, beyond the deer trails, to a hidden ravine where a stream pooled into a deep basin. "This is where I pan for gold," Mackenzie explained, showing her the rocky bottom where flecks of metal glinted in the current. "Most people don't know about this spot. It's how I earn hard currency when I need it." He taught her the technique, swirling water and sediment in the pan, watching for the heavier gold to settle, separating worthless rock from precious metal. It was tedious work, requiring patience and a good eye. "Why show me this?" Clara asked after an hour of practice. "Because if something happens to me, injury, sickness, worse, you need to know how to get money." Gold can be traded anywhere. This location is valuable. Now it's yours to know too. Clara understood what he was really saying. He was making her an equal partner in his survival, trusting her with secrets that could mean the difference between prosperity and poverty. They worked until dusk, collecting a small pouch of gold dust. Walking back, Mackenzie was more talkative than usual. "I came to these mountains 8 years ago," he said. "Brought Sarah with me, thinking we'd build something away from the world's corruption. She hated it at first, the isolation, the hardship, being so far from other women, but she adapted, became strong. You must have loved her very much." "I did, still do, in the way you love ghosts." He was quiet for a moment. "When she died, I thought about leaving, going back down to civilization, but I couldn't. Everything I built here was for her. Abandoning it felt like abandoning her memory." "So you stayed alone, until your father tried to sell you for livestock." His mouth twisted. "I didn't plan on taking anyone in, but standing there watching him negotiate like you were property, I couldn't walk away from that." "I'm glad you didn't." He glanced at her. "Are you? Truly? Because life up here is harder than anything down in the valleys. You could have found easier paths." Clara thought about what those easier paths would have looked like. A marriage to some rough man who'd work her until she broke. Employment in a tavern serving drinks and more. Her father's cabin slowly starving. None of those were paths. They were traps dressed as options. "This mountain's given me more than anywhere else ever did," she said firmly. "Choice, respect, purpose, that's not something I'd trade for ease." Mackenzie nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with the answer. September brought the first frost. Clara and Mackenzie worked frantically to harvest the garden before the cold could destroy it. They picked bushels of beans, dug potatoes, gathered squash, cut herbs to dry. The cabin filled with the smell of preservation, pickling, smoking, canning. Clara's hands were stained purple from berry preserves when a rider appeared on the trail. Not a trapper this time, but someone from Ashford, a boy of maybe 15 looking nervous. "You Mackenzie?" he called from a safe distance. "I am." "Got a message from Doc Carson. Says your neighbor downstream, the widow Patterson, is real sick. Asking if you can help." Mackenzie's jaw tightened. "I'm not a doctor." "Doc's 3 days away attending a mining accident. She's asking for you specific. Says you helped her husband before he died." Clara watched Mackenzie struggle with the decision. Helping meant leaving the mountain, leaving her alone, potentially for days. "Go," Clara said quietly. "I can manage here." "It's not safe. You taught me to shoot, to handle the animals, to survive. Trust that I learned." She met his eyes steadily. "I'll be fine." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Bar the door at night. Keep the rifle loaded. If anyone comes besides me, don't open up until you're certain it's safe." "I know." He packed quickly, mounted the horse the boy had brought, and left with final instructions about the animals and the garden. Clara watched him disappear down the trail, then turned back to the cabin, suddenly aware of how large and empty it seemed. That first night alone was the hardest. Every sound seemed amplified, wind rattling the shutters, animals moving in the darkness, the cabin settling. Clara kept the rifle across her lap, jumping at shadows. But as dawn broke and nothing terrible had happened, confidence replaced fear. She completed the morning chores efficiently, tended the garden, prepared meals for one. The second day was easier. By the third, she'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. On the fourth evening, as Clara was finishing supper, she heard a horse approaching. She grabbed the rifle, positioned herself by the window. "Clara, it's me!" Mackenzie's voice. She unbarred the door, relief flooding through her. He looked exhausted, his clothes dirty, shadows under his eyes. "Widow Patterson's recovering. Fever broke yesterday. You should eat. There's stew." While he ate, Clara studied him. She'd managed alone, proven her capability, but she'd also discovered something unexpected. She'd missed him, not just his help with the work, but his presence. The quiet companionship of shared meals. the safety of knowing someone else was there. "You did well," Mackenzie said, noticing her inventory of the completed tasks. "Place looks better than when I left." "I told you I could manage." "You did more than manage. You thrived." He pushed back from the table. "Clara, I need to say something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." She tensed, worried suddenly that this was leading somewhere she didn't want to go. "When I brought you here, it was supposed to be temporary, in my mind. Help you escape your father, give you time to figure out your next step. But you didn't leave, and somewhere along the way, this stopped being my mountain and became ours." He paused, choosing words carefully. "You're not my employee anymore. You're my partner, equal in all things, work, decisions, ownership." Clara's breath caught. "Mackenzie, let me finish. I'm 42 years old. You're 18. People will talk if they find out how we're living, unmarried, under one roof. I don't care what they think, but I care what it means for you. If you want to stay, truly stay, we should make it legal. Marriage in name, protection in practice." It was an echo of his original offer, but different now. They weren't strangers anymore. They were people who'd built something together, who understood each other's silences, who worked side by side with easy synchronization. "And if I said yes," Clara asked carefully, "what would change?" "Nothing and everything. We'd continue as we are, separate sleeping spaces, mutual respect, partnership. But you'd have legal protection, legal claim to everything here. No one could question your right to be on this mountain." Clara thought about the months that had passed, about the person she'd become, about the strange, quiet affection that had grown between them. It wasn't the passionate love of storybooks, but it was real and solid and built on genuine respect. "I have a condition," she said finally. Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Stop calling yourself Mackenzie like you're just one name. If we're going to marry, I should know your full name." He almost smiled. "James Mackenzie, though no one's called me James in 10 years. "James," Clara tested it. "All right, James Mackenzie, I'll marry you." This time his smile was full and genuine. "Then we'll ride to Ashford tomorrow and find someone to make it official." They married 2 days later in a brief ceremony performed by Ashford's circuit preacher. The only witnesses were the general store owner and his wife, who looked mildly scandalized by the whole affair, but kept their opinions to themselves. Clara signed the marriage record as Clara Whitmore Mackenzie, making the transformation official. Walking out of the small church, she felt different. Not owned now, but anchored. She had a name that meant something, a partnership built on choice rather than desperation. The ride back up the mountain was quiet but comfortable. When they reached the cabin, Mackenzie lifted her down from the horse with unexpected gentleness. "Welcome home, Mrs. Mackenzie," he said. "It's been home for months," Clara replied. "This just makes it official." That evening they sat on the porch watching stars emerge above the peaks. The air was crisp with coming autumn, smoke from the chimney rising straight in the still air. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Trading for me instead of walking away?" Mackenzie was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, "Best trade I ever made. That mule went lame within a month, but you've made this mountain worth living on again." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I think we saved each other." "Yeah," he agreed softly. "I think maybe we did." Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady. Outside, the mountain held them in its ancient embrace. And between them, something unnamed but profound continued growing. Not romance exactly, but something rarer. Genuine partnership between two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Clara had been sold for a mule at 17. At 18, she'd claimed a mountain, a partnership, and a future she'd never dared imagine possible. And she'd done it not by being rescued, but by becoming someone worth building a life alongside. Winter descended on the mountain with brutal efficiency. By November, snow had buried the trails waist deep, and the world contracted to the space between cabin and barn. Clara had heard stories about mountain winters, but experiencing one was entirely different. The isolation was absolute. For weeks they saw no one, heard nothing but wind and their own voices. Clara learned the particular rhythm of winter survival, the constant need for firewood, the careful rationing of supplies, the monotony of meals limited to what they'd preserved or stored. But she also discovered unexpected intimacies. James taught her to carve wood during the long evenings, their hands working side by firelight. She taught him songs her mother had sung, filling the cabin with melodies it hadn't heard since Sarah died. They played chess on a board he carved from pine, Clara learning strategy while James relearned patience. "You're getting better," he observed after she'd won 3 games in a row. "Or you're getting worse." "Definitely you getting better." He reset the board. "You've got a tactical mind. You think 3 moves ahead." Had to, growing up. Father was unpredictable. Learning to anticipate his moods kept me safe. James's expression darkened. "He never hit you, did he?" "Not often. He preferred words." Clara moved her first piece. "Words can hurt longer than bruises." "Yeah," James said quietly. "They can." They played in silence for a while, then James spoke again. "My father was a hard man, expected perfection, delivered punishment for anything less. I left home at 16, never went back. Heard he died a few years later, but I didn't attend the funeral." It was the most he'd ever shared about his past. Clara understood he was offering her something, a piece of his history, a window into what had shaped him. "Is that why you're patient with mistakes?" she asked. "Because you remember what it's like when someone isn't?" "Probably. Didn't want to become him, so I went the opposite direction." He captured her bishop. "Sometimes I wonder if I went too far the other way, if being too lenient is its own kind of failing." "You're not too lenient. You're fair. There's a difference." Christmas arrived unnoticed. They'd lost track of dates in the monotony of snow and survival. But one morning, Clara woke to find James had fashioned a small evergreen tree in the corner, decorated with carved wooden ornaments. "Thought you might like something to mark the season," he said, almost embarrassed. Clara examined the ornaments, tiny animals, stars, a perfect miniature cabin. Each one represented hours of carving during those nights when she'd thought he was just whittling scraps. "They're beautiful, James. Nothing fancy, but—" She kissed his cheek impulsively, startling them both. "They're perfect." "Thank you." He touched his cheek where her lips had been, something complicated crossing his face. "You're welcome." The moment stretched between them, different from the easy companionship they'd developed. Clara felt it too, the shift, the awareness that they were married in name but had maintained careful distance in practice. That distance suddenly seemed less necessary, less desired, but neither of them pushed. The moment passed, and they returned to their routines with unspoken agreement that whatever was changing between them would evolve at its own pace. January brought a blizzard that lasted 5 days. Snow piled against the cabin walls, covering the windows, entombing them in white silence. James dug a tunnel to the barn twice daily to tend the animals, returning encrusted with ice. On the 3rd day, the cow fell sick. James spent hours in the freezing barn trying to save her, but she died before dawn. They butchered her immediately, couldn't afford to waste the meat, and spent the next day processing beef in the cabin, the smell of blood and work filling the small space. "I'm sorry about the cow," Clara said while packing meat in snow to freeze. "Animals die. It's the way of things." But James looked troubled. "Problem is, she was our only cow. No milk now until spring, when I can trade for another. We'll manage. We have the goats. Goat milk isn't the same for making cheese, and we needed that cow for breeding." He sat heavily, exhausted. "It's a setback." Clara saw deeper worry in his face. "What else is wrong?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Been doing inventory. We're lower on supplies than I realized. Flour, especially. We'll run out before spring unless we're very careful." "How careful?" "1 meal a day for the next 2 months, maybe. rationing everything else. He rubbed his face. I miscalculated, didn't account for feeding 2 people through winter. Last few years I barely ate. Didn't matter if I went hungry, but I won't have you starving. Clara sat across from him. Then we both ration, 1 meal a day, equal portions. We're partners, remember? We share the hardship. Clara, no arguments. You said equal in all things. That includes the lean times. He looked at her with something close to reverence. Most women would panic, demand we risk the trails to get more supplies. The trails are impassable, and you know it. Panicking won't fill the flour tin. She squeezed his hand. We'll survive, James. We're both tougher than we look. They survived, but barely. February was a blur of hunger and cold and grinding endurance. Clara learned what real starvation felt like. The constant gnawing emptiness, the weakness, the way her body consumed itself for fuel. James gave her portions of his food when he thought she wasn't looking. She did the same for him. They were both gaunt by the time the thaw began in March, but they'd made it through. The first trader who made it up the mountain took one look at them and whistled low. You 2 look like walking corpses. Bad winter, James said shortly. You have flour to sell? They bought supplies with gold dust, restocking everything they'd depleted. The trader, an older man named Morrison, eyed Clara with curiosity. Heard Mackenzie had taken a wife, didn't believe it until now. He smiled at Clara. You're braver than most, miss. Not many women could handle a mountain winter. It's Clara Mackenzie now, she corrected, and the mountain's my home. Morrison nodded approvingly. Good stock, this one, he told James. You chose well. After he left, James turned to Clara. You didn't have to correct him about your name. Yes, I did. I'm not ashamed of being your wife. Something shifted on his expression. Walls coming down, distance closing. I'm not ashamed either, but Clara, I want you to know, if you ever want this to be a real marriage, not just legal papers and separate beds. I know, she interrupted softly, and when I'm ready, I'll tell you. He nodded, accepting the boundary, but his eyes held hope. Spring transformed the mountain. Clara had forgotten what green looked like, what warmth felt like. She worked in the revived garden with desperate energy, planting twice what they'd had before, determined never to face starvation again. James built a larger chicken coop, expanded the barn, and purchased 2 cows and a bull from a rancher downriver. We'll breed our own herd, he explained. Never be caught short on livestock again. They worked dawn to dusk, rebuilding what winter had depleted, strengthening their defenses against future hardship. And through it all, Clara felt something blooming inside her beyond just relief at survival. Pride in what they'd endured together, gratitude for a partner who'd starved alongside her rather than taking more than his share. One evening in late April, while they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the peaks gold, Clara made her decision. James, I want to move my things to the loft. He went very still. You sure? We nearly died this winter. Life's too short and too uncertain to keep pretending we're not building something real here. She turned to face him. I'm not in love with you the way storybooks describe it, but I trust you completely, respect you deeply, and care about you more than I've cared about anyone. If that's not enough, it's more than enough. He took her hand carefully, like she might startle. Clara, I don't need poetry or passion. I need partnership, honesty, and someone who chooses to stay when staying gets hard. You've proven all that and more. That night, Clara climbed the ladder to the loft for the first time as more than just James's wife in name. She was nervous, uncertain, carrying years of warnings from her mother about what men wanted and took. But James was gentle, patient, treating her with the same careful respect he'd shown since that first day in Ashford. He let her set the pace, asked permission, made sure she knew she could change her mind at any moment. Afterward, lying in the darkness with his arm around her, Clara felt something she'd never experienced before, safe, chosen, and genuinely wanted for herself rather than what she could provide. You all right? James asked quietly. Better than all right, eh? Pressed closer. James, thank you. For what? For making this feel like choice instead of obligation. His arm tightened around her. It's always been choice, Clara. From the moment you decided to stay, everything after has just been us choosing each other over and over. Summer arrived in full glory. The garden exploded with produce. The new cows thrived. And Clara discovered she was pregnant. She recognized the signs from watching other women, the morning sickness, the exhaustion, the way her body felt different. She told James on a Tuesday morning while he was repairing fence line, "I'm carrying a child." He dropped the hammer, stared at her. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor." She watched his face anxiously. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased?" He crossed to her, pulled her into an embrace so tight she squeaked. "Clara, I never thought I'd have another chance at this. After Sarah and the baby died." His voice broke. "Yes, I'm pleased. I'm terrified and grateful and more pleased than I have words for." They stood holding each other in the mountain sunlight, two people who'd found each other through the ugliest of circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. "We'll need to prepare," James said finally. "Build a cradle. Stock extra supplies in case you can't work toward the end. I should bring a midwife up before you're too far along. Have her check that everything's progressing right." "James, breathe," Clara smiled. "We have months yet." "I know, but—" He touched her stomach tentatively. "I won't lose you the way I lost Sarah. I won't survive that twice." "You won't lose me. I'm stronger than I look, remember?" She covered his hand with hers. "We'll do this together, like everything else." The months that followed were a blur of preparation and anticipation. James built a cradle from oak, carving protective symbols into the wood. Clara sewed tiny clothes from fabric he traded for in Ashford. They argued about names, laughed about their fears, planned for a future that included 3 instead of 2. And through it all, Clara marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From being worth $3 and a mule to being the center of someone's world. From having nothing to having everything that mattered. She'd been sold like livestock at 17. Now, at 19, she was building a family with a man who treated her like royalty despite living in a cabin on an isolated mountain. The world would call them poor by material standards, but standing on her porch, watching her husband work while their child grew inside her, Clara knew she was the richest woman in the territory. She'd found her kingdom, claimed her crown, and built her castle from logs and determination and love that had grown quietly in the spaces between survival and partnership. And she'd never trade it for anything. The baby arrived on a February morning during the worst possible time, another blizzard, trails blocked, no way to get help from the valley. Clara's labor started just after dawn, and James went pale when he realized what was happening. "I'll ride for the midwife," he said, already moving toward his coat. "You won't make it halfway down in this weather." Clara gripped the table as another contraction hit. "We're doing this ourselves." James had delivered calves and foals, but a human baby was different. His hands shook as he boiled water, gathered clean cloths, tried to remember everything the midwife had told him during her visit months ago. "I can't do this," he admitted, fear naked on his face. "Clara, what if something goes wrong? What if I lose you?" She caught his hand between contractions, forced him to meet her eyes. "You won't lose me. I'm not Sarah. I'm strong, the baby's positioned right, and we've survived worse than this together." Another contraction stole her breath. "But I need you calm, James. I need you present, not drowning in fear of the past." Her words steadied him. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and became the man she needed, confident, capable, focused on the present instead of haunted by memory. The labor lasted 14 hours. James never left her side, offering water, supporting her weight, speaking encouragement when she wanted to give up. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, something miraculous was happening despite the storm. Just before midnight, their daughter entered the world, screaming her fury at the cold, the light, the sheer audacity of existence. James caught her with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he wrapped her in warm blankets. "She's perfect," he whispered, placing the baby in Clara's arms. "You're both perfect." Clara looked down at the small red face and felt her heart reorganize itself around this new person. "Hello, little one. Welcome to your mountain." They named her Rose after the wild roses that grew near the creek where James had taught Clara to pan for gold. Rose Mackenzie, born in a blizzard, delivered by her father's hands on a mountain most people would never see. The weeks after Rose's birth were the hardest Clara had experienced since that first winter. The baby cried constantly, feeding every 2 hours, sleeping in brief fragments that left Clara exhausted and raw. James did everything he could, handling all the chores, cooking meals, walking Rose when she fussed so Clara could sleep, but the weight of new motherhood was crushing. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong," Clara sobbed one night, the baby wailing despite being fed, changed, and held. "Nothing works. Nothing helps." James took Rose, tucked her against his chest, and began humming, a low, wordless tune that vibrated through his body. Miraculously, Rose quieted, her small fist curling into his shirt. "How did you—" "Used to do this with colicky calves," he admitted. "The vibration calms them. Figured it might work on humans, too." Clara laughed through her tears, the absurdity of it breaking through her despair. "You're comparing our daughter to livestock. If livestock remedies work, I'll use them." He smiled. "Get some sleep, Clara. I've got her." By spring, they'd found their rhythm. Rose proved to be a hardy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything. Clara wore her in a sling while working in the garden, Rose's dark eyes tracking birds and clouds with serious concentration. James was transformed by fatherhood. The man who'd been solitary and guarded became someone who sang silly songs, made faces to provoke giggles, carved toys with meticulous care. Clara would find him at odd hours just watching Rose sleep, his expression full of wonder and terror in equal measure. "I'm afraid every moment," he confessed one night. "Afraid she'll get sick, get hurt, that I'll fail to protect her somehow." "That's parenthood," Clara said. "Loving someone so much that fear becomes your constant companion." "How do you stand it?" "By trusting that we're doing our best, and that's enough." She leaned against him. "Rose is lucky, James. She has a father who'd move mountains for her and a home built on choice instead of obligation. That's more than most children get." When Rose was 6 months old, Clara made her first trip back to Ashford since the wedding. She needed supplies James couldn't carry alone, and she wanted Rose to be seen by a doctor just to ensure everything was developing properly. The town had changed. New buildings, new people, the rough edges softening as civilization crept further into the mountains. But some things remained the same. Clara saw familiar faces, received nods from people who'd witnessed her father's transaction 3 years ago. At the general store, Morrison's wife cooed over Rose. "She's beautiful, Clara. And you look so different from that scared girl who came through here years back." "I am different," Clara agreed, surprised by how true it was. In the doctor's office, Doc Carson pronounced Rose healthy and developing perfectly. Then he turned his attention to Clara. "And how are you managing? That's isolated territory you're living in." "I like the isolation. It suits me. Most women would find it lonely." Clara thought about her morning routine, feeding chickens with Rose on her hip, James bringing her coffee exactly how she liked it, the 3 of them eating breakfast together while sunlight streamed through the cabin windows. "I'm not lonely," she said simply. "I'm home." On the way out of town, Clara saw her father. He was outside the tavern, older and more wrecked than she remembered. His clothes were filthy, his hands trembled with drink, and he'd lost weight in a way that suggested sickness rather than hunger. He saw her too. His eyes went to Rose, then back to Clara's face, and something like recognition flickered there. "Clara?" His voice was rough, uncertain. She could have walked past, pretended she hadn't heard. Part of her wanted to unleash 3 years of anger. to make him see what he'd lost when he traded her for a mule. But looking at him, this broken man who'd never figured out how to be a father, she felt only pity. "Hello, Silas? That your baby?" "Her name is Rose. She's 6 months old." He moved closer, stinking of alcohol and unwashed clothes. "You did all right then. Mackenzie treating you decent?" "Better than decent. He treats me like I matter." Something painful crossed her father's face. "I was wrong. About the trade. About—" He stopped, words failing him. "I was wrong about everything." Clara could have said many things, could have told him exactly how wrong he'd been, how much damage he'd caused, how she'd spent years believing his assessment of her worth. But what would be the point? He was already destroyed by his own choices. "Goodbye, Silas," she said, and walked away. She didn't look back. That part of her life was over, finished, irrelevant to the person she'd become. James was waiting at the edge of town with the pack horse. He took one look at her face and asked, "You saw him?" "Yes, he looks terrible." "Good." James's voice was hard. "He deserves worse." "Maybe, but hating him takes energy I'd rather spend on better things." She handed Rose to him, mounted her own horse. "He's nothing to me now, James. Less than nothing. Just a stranger who happened to share my blood." They rode home in comfortable silence, Rose sleeping against James's chest. The mountain rose before them, still snow-capped despite the spring warmth, still beautiful and harsh, and exactly what Clara needed. Summer brought unexpected visitors. James' younger brother Samuel appeared one afternoon with his wife and 2 children. Clara hadn't known James had living family, he'd never mentioned them. The reunion was awkward. Samuel was everything James wasn't, smooth, talkative, comfortable in civilization. His wife, Patricia, looked at the cabin with barely concealed horror. "You actually live here year-round?" she asked Clara while the men talked outside. "It's home. But it's so primitive. No neighbors, no society, nothing but trees and isolation." Patricia shuddered delicately. "I'd go mad within a week." Clara felt defensive on the mountain's behalf. "It's peaceful, safe, we have everything we need." "If you say so." Patricia's tone suggested she thought Clara was deluded or lying. The visit lasted 3 uncomfortable days. Samuel tried to convince James to move back to Philadelphia, to work in the family business, to give Rose proper advantages. Patricia made comments about Clara's rough hands, her simple clothes, her rustic way of managing the household. By the time they left, Clara was exhausted from being judged and found wanting. "I'm sorry," James said after they'd gone. "I should have warned you about Samuel. He's always thought I was crazy for choosing this life." "Is he right? Are we depriving Rose of something by raising her here?" James pulled her close. "Rose has parents who love her, clean air, safety, and she'll learn skills most people never acquire. She'll grow up knowing how to survive, how to work, how to find joy in simple things. That's not deprivation, that's wealth." Clara wanted to believe him, but Patricia's words lingered, planting seeds of doubt. What if Rose grew up resenting them for keeping her isolated? What if she wanted more than the mountain could provide? The doubts festered through summer. Clara found herself watching Rose with new worry, wondering if they were being selfish, if love was enough when there were no other children to play with, no school, no opportunities beyond what they could provide. In August, a traveling teacher passed through, a young woman bringing books and lessons to isolated families. She spent an afternoon at the cabin, met Rose, talked with Clara and James about education. "She's bright," the teacher observed, watching Rose stack blocks with focused determination. "She'll need stimulation, books, lessons as she grows, but there's no reason you can't provide that here." "You really think so?" Clara asked. "I've seen children raised in cities who can't think for themselves, and children raised in isolation who are brilliant, self-sufficient, curious about everything. Location matters less than parental investment." She smiled at Clara. "And you're clearly invested." The words eased something in Clara's chest. They could do this. They could give Rose everything she needed right here, on their mountain. That night, Clara told James about her doubts, her fears that they were somehow failing Rose by choosing this life. "Patricia got in your head," he said, anger creeping into his voice. "She always was good at that, making people question themselves." "Maybe she's right, though. She's not." James was firm. "Clara, look at our daughter. Really look at her. She's healthy, happy, confident. She's learning to walk on a mountain that would terrify most adults. She's developing skills and strength that will serve her entire life. We're not depriving her. We're preparing her for a world that's harder than Patricia's parlor games could ever teach." Clara looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, and saw the truth in James's words. Their daughter was thriving, not despite their choices, but because of them. "You're right," she said finally. "I let doubt override what I can see with my own eyes. It happens. Patricia's particularly skilled at it." He drew Clara close. "But Clara, remember, you survived things that would have broken Patricia within hours. Your strength, your resilience, your ability to find joy in simplicity, those are the gifts you're passing to Rose. Don't let anyone make you doubt their value." As autumn painted the mountain in copper and gold, Clara stood on the porch watching James teach Rose to identify different bird calls. The baby couldn't speak yet, but she listened intently, mimicking the sounds in her own baby language. This was her kingdom, not grand, not impressive to outsiders, but precious beyond measure to those who called it home. She'd been sold for a mule at 17, dismissed as worthless by the man who should have cherished her. Now she was a mother, a wife, a partner in something beautiful and lasting. She'd claimed her worth not through others' validation, but through her own determination to survive, adapt, and build something better than what she'd been given. The mountain stood eternal around them, indifferent to human struggles, but sheltering those brave enough to make it home. And Clara had made it home in every sense that mattered. Not just a physical place, but a state of being where she was valued, respected, and loved for exactly who she was. That was royalty of the truest kind. Not crowns and castles, but being seen and chosen and celebrated by those who mattered most. She'd found her kingdom, claimed her throne, and built her legacy one day at a time, and she wouldn't trade it for all the comfort and society Patricia's world could offer. Rose turned 3 on a February morning that dawned clear and bright. A gift after weeks of gray skies. Clara baked a small cake with precious sugar James had traded for, and they celebrated with the extravagance of letting Rose stay up past her bedtime. "Make a wish," Clara said, holding the single candle they'd fashioned from beeswax. Rose squeezed her eyes shut with exaggerated concentration, then blew out the flame with enough force to spray spittle everywhere. James laughed, wiping his face, while Rose beamed with accomplishment. Later, after Rose had finally surrendered to sleep, Clara and James sat by the fire tallying their accounts. It had become a yearly ritual, assessing what they had, what they needed, planning for the future. "We're doing better than I expected," James said, reviewing the numbers. "The gold panning's been profitable, the cattle herd is growing, and Morrison says he can sell everything we produce. We could expand, build a larger barn, maybe acquire more livestock. Or we could save it," Clara suggested, "for Rose's future, if she wants schooling beyond what we can teach, or if she decides mountain life isn't for her." James looked troubled. "You think she'll leave?" "I think we should give her the choice, the way no one gave me choice." Clara met his eyes. "We can't trap her here with love, James. We have to build something she can return to by choice, not obligation." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're wiser than me. Just more familiar with what happens when someone takes your choices away." They compromised. Half the profits for expansion, half into savings for Rose's future. It was the way they approached everything now, through discussion and negotiation, rather than one person deciding for both. Spring brought new challenges. A late frost killed half their garden seedlings. forcing them to replant with dwindling seed stores. Then one of the cows died during calving, taking her calf with her. James worked himself to exhaustion trying to compensate for the losses, his face growing haggard with worry. "We'll recover," Clara said, watching him return from another 16-hour day. "We always do. This is different. We have Rose to think about now. Can't afford to come up short like that first winter. Then we adapt. I'll expand the chicken operation. Eggs sell pal. You focus on the trap lines. We'll make it work." But Clara worried too. She'd begun teaching Rose letters and numbers using a primer the traveling teacher had left. Watching her daughter's quick mind absorb information, Clara wondered if the mountain would be enough as Rose grew older. What if she needed more than 2 parents and endless wilderness could provide? The question haunted her through summer. Clara found herself watching Rose play, creating elaborate games with sticks and rocks, narrating complex stories to herself, displaying imagination that seemed to need more outlet than their isolated life offered. In July, unexpected help arrived. A family moving west stopped to water their horses at the creek. They had 4 children, including a girl near Rose's age. The children played together for 3 hours while the adults talked, and Clara watched her daughter transform, laughing, sharing, negotiating the complex social rules that children create. After they left, Rose was withdrawn for days, asking repeatedly when the other children would return. "She needs friends," Clara said to James, "children her own age to interact with. There are no other children up here. The nearest family with kids is 10 miles away. Then maybe we need to reconsider where we're living." James looked stricken. "You want to leave the mountain?" "I want what's best for Rose. If that means leaving, then yes." They argued for the first time in years, James defensive of the life they'd built, Clara advocating for Rose's needs. The argument ended without resolution, both of them retreating to separate corners of the cabin. That night, Clara lay awake in the loft, questioning everything. Had she been selfish, letting herself get comfortable in isolation? Was she repeating her father's mistake, prioritizing her own needs over her child's welfare? The next morning, James was gone before dawn. He returned at noon with Morrison in tow. "Tell her what you told me," James said to the trader. Morrison settled at the table, accepted the coffee Clara offered. "There's a new settlement forming about 5 miles east of here. Families mostly, miners, loggers, people wanting mountain life but with neighbors close enough for safety and socializing. They're building a school, planning a church, even talking about a general store." "How many families?" Clara asked. 8 so far, more coming as word spreads. Couple of them have children around Rose's age. Morrison looked between them. "James thinks you might be interested in relocating closer." Clara looked at James, surprised. "You'd leave this place?" "I'd consider it for Rose. For you." His voice was rough. "This cabin, this mountain, it saved me after Sarah died. But maybe I've been clinging to it out of fear rather than wisdom. If there's somewhere we can give Rose what she needs, while keeping what matters most, each other, then I'm willing to try." Over the next week, they visited the new settlement. It was raw and unfinished. Cabins in various stages of construction, tree stumps everywhere, mud roads connecting scattered buildings. But it was alive with possibility and people. Rose met 3 other children within an hour and was instantly absorbed into their games. Clara watched her daughter bloom in ways she never had in isolation, sharing, competing, learning the give and take of friendship. "What do you think?" James asked. Clara looked at the settlement, then back at their mountain visible in the distance. "I think we could build something here, not instead of the mountain, but in addition to it. Keep the cabin as summer quarters when you're trapping and panning. Live here during the school year so Rose has access to other children and education. Split our time between both places? Why not? Other families do it. Miners who move seasonally, trappers who winter in town. We have 2 locations that could each serve us part of the year." James considered this, his expression thoughtful. It would be more work, maintaining 2 properties, moving between them. but it gives Rose everything: wilderness skills from mountain life, social development from settlement life, and parents who adapt instead of staying rigid. He smiled slowly. You really are wiser than me. They purchased land in the settlement, 5 acres with a half-built cabin they could finish. The price took most of their savings, but Morrison extended credit based on James's reputation and future earnings. The next months were a blur of construction. James worked with other settlers on a barn raising, and they reciprocated by helping finish the cabin. Clara joined the women forming the school committee, planning curriculum and organizing supplies. Rose attended informal lessons in a neighbor's cabin, reveling in the company of other children. But Clara noticed James struggling with the transition. He was quieter in the settlement, uncomfortable with the constant social interaction, tension visible in his shoulders. You hate it here, she said one evening after a community dinner where James had barely spoken. I don't hate it, He struggled for words. There are so many people, so much noise. I feel like I can't breathe sometimes. Then we go back to the mountain more often. Every weekend if you need it. This doesn't have to be all or nothing, James. They found their balance. Weekdays in the settlement for Rose's schooling and social development. Weekends on the mountain for the quiet and simplicity James needed. It was exhausting, but it worked. Clara discovered she enjoyed settlement life more than she'd expected. The community of women sharing recipes, watching each other's children, supporting one another through difficulties, filled something she hadn't known was empty. She'd been so focused on surviving that she'd forgotten humans were meant to be social creatures. But she also cherished those weekend returns to the mountain. The silence after the settlement's constant chatter, the space to think, the intimacy of just their small family without the complexities of community politics. Rose thrived under both systems. By age 5, she could read simple books, had memorized Bible verses for church, and played complex games with her settlement friends. But she could also track deer, identify edible plants, and help James with trap lines. She was becoming someone who belonged in multiple worlds, rather than being confined to just one. She's going to be remarkable, James said one evening, watching Rose explain the life cycle of chickens to a younger child with complete authority. She already is, Clara replied. Winter brought tragedy to the settlement. Influenza swept through, hitting the children hardest. 2 died within a week, siblings from a family that had arrived just months earlier. The settlement gathered for the funeral, grief-stricken and terrified. Rose fell sick 3 days later. Clara had never known fear like watching her daughter burn with fever, cough until she couldn't breathe, grow weaker with each passing hour. James rode through a snowstorm to bring Doc Carson, who came but could offer little beyond keeping Rose comfortable and hoping the fever broke. For 5 days, Clara and James took turns sitting with Rose, bathing her with cool water, forcing liquids down her throat, praying to a God Clara wasn't sure she believed in, but begged anyway. Please don't take her, Clara whispered during the worst night, when Rose's breathing grew shallow and her skin turned ashen. Take me instead. She's innocent. She deserves to live. James pulled Clara against him, both of them crying, both of them helpless in the face of something no amount of mountain skills or determination could fight. But Rose was stronger than the sickness. On the 6th morning, her fever broke. She opened her eyes, asked for water in a voice barely above a whisper, and fell into natural sleep rather than the fevered unconsciousness that had held her. Clara collapsed with relief, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. James held her, his own tears soaking into her hair, both of them shaking with the aftermath of terror. We almost lost her, Clara said when she could speak again. But we didn't. She fought and she won. James kissed her forehead. She's got your strength, Clara, your refusal to give up. The illness left Rose weakened, but alive. She recovered slowly through the winter, regaining strength and vitality by increments. The settlement rallied around them, neighbors bringing food, watching Rose so Clara and James could rest. offering prayers and practical support. "This is why we moved here," James said one evening after yet another neighbor had stopped by with soup. "Not just for Rose's education, but for this community that shows up when everything falls apart." Clara understood what he meant. On the mountain, they would have faced Rose's illness alone, with no doctor accessible and no support beyond what they could provide each other. The settlement had saved their daughter as surely as medicine or prayer, but she also understood something else, that James had sacrificed his preferred isolation for Rose's benefit, and that sacrifice was the deepest form of love he could offer. Spring arrived eventually, tentative and slow. Rose returned to school, still thin but determined to catch up on missed lessons. The settlement began planning summer projects, expanding the school, building a proper church, organizing seasonal celebrations. Clara found herself on multiple committees, her natural organizational skills making her valuable to the community. She helped plan the first 4th of July celebration, organized a quilting circle that raised money for school supplies, and mediated disputes between families with the diplomatic fairness she'd learned from James. "You're becoming a leader here," James observed, watching her navigate a complicated disagreement about property lines with patience and wisdom. "I'm just doing what needs doing." "No, you're doing more than that. You're building something beyond our family, building community, structure, stability for everyone here." Clara hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. She'd arrived in the settlement as James Mackenzie's wife, known primarily through his reputation. Now she was Clara Mackenzie, teacher, organizer, mediator, someone with her own identity and influence. It was strange and wonderful to be recognized for herself, rather than through her relationship to someone else. By summer, the settlement had grown to 15 families. The school expanded to 2 rooms, hired a permanent teacher, and established a curriculum that extended through 8th grade. Rose, now 6, was reading at a level several years beyond her age and teaching younger children their letters with enthusiastic authority. "She wants to be a teacher when she grows up," Clara told James. "She announced it yesterday with complete certainty. Then we'll make sure she gets the training for it." James smiled, "Though I suspect she'll be running the whole school by the time she's 20. "Probably," Clara agreed. "She's got opinions and the confidence to share them." "Wonder where she gets that from," James teased. Clara laughed, recognizing herself in her daughter's fierce certainty and refusal to be dismissed. That evening, sitting on the porch of their settlement cabin with Rose playing nearby and the sounds of the community settling into dusk around them, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd been sold for a mule at 17, a transaction meant to erase her, to reduce her to less than livestock value, but that moment of utter degradation had led to everything she'd become. Without being traded, she never would have met James. Without James, she never would have discovered her own strength, learned to survive on a mountain, built confidence through capability. Without the mountain, she wouldn't have developed the resilience needed to adapt to settlement life, to lead, to build community. Every terrible thing had somehow led to something beautiful, not because the terrible things were good, they weren't, but because she'd refused to let them define her final destination. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing her reflective expression. "About being sold for a mule," she said honestly, "and how that was supposed to be the end of my story. But it turned out to be the beginning." James took her hand, threaded his fingers through hers. "Best mule I never kept." Clara laughed. "That's terrible, but true." He squeezed her hand. "You've built an empire from nothing, Clara. Not land or money, but something more valuable. A life where you matter, where you lead, where people look to you for wisdom and guidance. That's royalty of the truest kind." She leaned against him, watching Rose chase fireflies in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of families settling in for the night, feeling the weight of community and purpose and belonging. She'd been sold like property, treated as disposable, told through action and silence that she was worth less than an animal. But she'd built something that proved them all wrong, proved that worth wasn't assigned by others but claimed through action, that royalty came from how you treated yourself and others rather than from titles or validation. Her kingdom wasn't grand or impressive. It was a mountain cabin and a settlement home, a husband who chose her daily, a daughter who would grow up knowing her mother had refused to be broken, and a community that valued her contributions. But it was hers, built with her hands, shaped by her choices, defended through her refusal to accept anyone else's assessment of her value. And that made her richer than any queen who'd inherited a throne without having to build it first. 10 years passed like water running downhill, inevitable, transforming everything in its path. Clara stood at the window of their settlement home, now expanded and refined, watching Rose walk toward the schoolhouse with a stack of books under her arm. At 16, her daughter had inherited James's steady temperament and Clara's fierce determination, creating someone who moved through the world with quiet confidence. "She's interviewing for the teaching assistant position today," James said, coming to stand beside Clara. He was 52 now, silver threading heavily through his beard, his movements slightly slower but still strong. "She'll get it. The current teacher practically begged her to apply. She's young for the responsibility." "So was I when I started managing this household." Clara smiled. "Youth and capability aren't mutually exclusive." The settlement had transformed into a proper town, Harper's Ridge, named after the first family to build there. Main Street boasted a general store, a church, a schoolhouse, a small hotel, and a dozen other businesses. The population had swelled to nearly 200 people, with more arriving each season drawn by gold finds in the higher elevations and logging operations in the valleys. Clara had transformed along with it. She'd served on the school board for 8 years, helped establish the town's first lending library, and currently sat on the council that made decisions about infrastructure and growth. People sought her advice on everything from property disputes to child rearing to whether the town should invest in a telegraph line. "Mrs. Mackenzie," the mayor had said during the last council meeting, "your perspective is invaluable. You've seen this place grow from raw wilderness to civilization. That institutional memory matters." Institutional memory. Clara had laughed privately at the phrase. She had memory, certainly, of arriving here desperate and afraid, of building something from nothing, of learning that survival required both strength and flexibility. But she also had scars, not physical ones, but the kind that lived in your chest and woke you some nights with the remembered weight of worthlessness. The morning after Rose's interview, Clara made her monthly visit to the mountain cabin. She went alone now. James's knees troubled him on the steep climb, and Rose preferred the settlement's bustle to wilderness solitude. But Clara needed these pilgrimages to the place where she'd first learned her own strength. The cabin stood weathered but solid, maintained through regular visits and necessary repairs. Clara let herself in, breathed the familiar smell of pine and old smoke, and felt something in her chest loosen. She spent the day doing small tasks, sweeping, checking for leaks, splitting kindling. The physical work was meditative, allowing her mind to wander through memory and reflection. At sunset, she sat on the porch where she'd sat countless times with James, watching light paint the peaks in shades of amber and rose. This mountain had been her salvation and her school, teaching lessons no classroom could provide about resilience, adaptation, and the difference between surviving and living. A sound made her turn. James was climbing the trail, moving carefully but determinedly. "You followed me," Clara said, unsurprised. "Thought you might want company." He settled beside her with a slight groan. "Though those knees are reminding me I'm not 40 anymore." "You shouldn't have climbed all this way." "Probably not, but 16 years ago I made a choice on this mountain that changed everything. Seemed right to come back and remember." He took her hand. "You know what today is?" Clara thought back, counting years and seasons. "The anniversary of when you traded for me." 16 years since the best decision I ever made, walking out of that tavern with a terrified girl and a determination to do at least one decent thing. I wasn't that terrified. You were absolutely terrified. You just hid it behind dignity. He smiled. That's when I first knew you were stronger than you looked. Most people crumble when they're scared. You just stood taller. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't feel strong. I felt worthless, like I'd been weighed and found wanting. I know, but Clara, look at what you've built from that moment. Look at who you've become. He gestured toward the settlement visible in the distance. That town down there runs better because you're in it. Rose is becoming an extraordinary woman because you showed her what extraordinary looks like, and his voice roughened. I got to spend 16 years with someone who makes me want to be better than I am. James, let me finish. I've been thinking about legacy lately, what we leave behind when we're gone, and I realized our legacy isn't this cabin or the gold we've saved, or even the businesses we've built. It's Rose, yes, but it's also every person you've helped down there, every woman you've given advice to, every child you've taught to read. You've been multiplying yourself for years, Clara, creating ripples that will spread long after we're both gone. Clara wiped her eyes. I just did what needed doing. No, you did what most people wouldn't. You took the pain of being treated as worthless and transformed it into a mission to make sure others knew their worth. That's alchemy of the highest order. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered. Somewhere below, Harper's Ridge was lighting lamps, families gathering for evening meals, the town settling into its nightly rhythms. Clara thought about all those lives intersecting, about the invisible threads connecting people through shared experience and mutual support. Do you ever regret it, she asked, taking me on, all the complications that came with it? James was quiet for a long moment. I regret that you had to experience being sold like property. I regret that you carry scars from a father who should have protected you. I regret every moment you've doubted your worth because of what he did. He turned to face her. But regret bringing you into my life? Never. Not for a single second. The next morning they returned to Harper's Ridge together, arriving to news that Rose had been offered the teaching assistant position. She accepted with a maturity that made Clara's heart swell with pride and ache with the recognition that her daughter was becoming someone who would soon need to build her own path. She'll leave eventually, Clara said to James that night, for more education, for opportunities we can't provide here. I know, and we'll let her go the way your father should have let you go, with blessing instead of transaction. He pulled Clara close. That's the difference between us and him. We built something she can return to by choice, not something she has to escape from. 3 months later, a letter arrived from a teacher's college in Denver. They were offering scholarships to promising young women interested in education, and someone, Clara suspected the traveling teacher who still visited annually, had recommended Rose. Rose read the letter 3 times, her face a mixture of excitement and guilt. It would mean leaving for 2 years. Then you should go, Clara said, though the words cost her. But you need help here, and the school will manage. Clara took her daughter's hands. Rose, I was sold at 17 because my father saw me as a burden to be discarded. You're being offered education at 16 because people recognize your potential. Do you understand how different those two things are? Of course, but no buts. You're going. We'll manage, the town will manage, and you'll come back with knowledge and skills that will benefit everyone. Clara smiled through threatening tears. This is what we saved for. This is why we built 2 homes and split our time and worked ourselves half to death, so you could have choices we never had. Rose left in September on a clear morning that felt too ordinary for such a significant departure. Clara stood with James watching the stage pull away, their daughter's face visible through the window until distance erased detail. She'll be fine, James said. though his voice was rough. "I know, it's us I'm worried about." Clara leaned into him. "The house is going to feel very empty." It did feel empty, but it also felt like success. They'd raised a daughter secure enough to leave, confident enough to pursue her dreams, rooted enough to know she could always come home. Letters arrived weekly. Rose loved her classes, had made friends, was learning teaching methodologies that challenged everything she thought she knew. Clara saved every letter, reading them until the paper wore soft. With Rose gone, Clara threw herself into community work with renewed energy. She established a program helping new families integrate into Harper's Ridge, ensuring no one arrived as lost and desperate as she once had. She organized a women's cooperative that allowed them to pool resources and negotiate better prices for supplies. She mentored young women, offering the guidance she'd never received. James noticed the shift. "You're doing more than ever." "I have more time now." "It's more than that. You're building something intentional, a support system so other women don't have to face what you faced alone." He was right. Clara had spent years surviving, then thriving, and now she was focused on lifting others. Every woman she helped, every family she welcomed, every young person she mentored felt like correcting the past, like proving that cruelty didn't have to be perpetuated. 2 years later, Rose returned with a teaching certificate, new ideas, and a confidence that came from testing yourself against the world and succeeding. She took over the school, implementing progressive methods that transformed education in Harper's Ridge. Clara watched her daughter lead with authority and compassion, seeing herself reflected but also seeing someone entirely new. Someone who'd never questioned her own worth, never learned to make herself small, never believed the lie that she was disposable. "That's your real legacy," James said, watching Rose command a town meeting with casual competence. "Not just that you survived, but that you made sure she never had to." On a spring morning when Clara was 37, word came that her father had died. A neighbor from Ashford brought the news. Silas Whitmore had collapsed outside the tavern, probably his heart, possibly his liver, certainly his choices finally catching up. "There's no one to bury him proper," the neighbor said. "Thought you should know, being his only kin." Clara felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a distant acknowledgement that someone she used to know was gone. "I'll pay for the burial," she said finally, "but I won't attend." James questioned her later. "You sure? Might bring closure." "I had closure 16 years ago when I walked away from him in Ashford. He was already dead to me then. This just makes it official." She met James's eyes. "I don't owe him forgiveness or grief or anything else. I owe him nothing." Fair enough. But that night, Clara dreamed of the transaction, standing in the tavern mud while her father counted silver and inspected livestock, deciding her worth based on what he could get for her. She woke with tears on her face and James holding her. "It still hurts," she admitted. "Even after everything, knowing he valued me so little, it still hurts." "It probably always will. That kind of wound doesn't fully heal." James wiped her tears. "But Clara, his assessment was wrong. His blindness doesn't diminish your light. It just proves he was too damaged to see it." As years continued their inevitable march, Clara watched Harper's Ridge mature into a true town. Rose married a teacher from Denver, a quiet man who loved books, and treated her like the treasure she was. They had 2 children who called Clara Grandma and climbed all over James like he was their personal mountain. Clara was 45 when the town council approached her about running for mayor. "The current mayor's retiring," they explained. "We need someone with vision, someone who understands where we came from and where we're heading. That's you, Mrs. Mackenzie." Clara laughed. "I'm not qualified to be mayor." "You've been unofficially running half this town for years," Rose pointed out. "Might as well get the title and the authority to match." She won the election by a landslide. Mayor Clara Mackenzie. It felt absurd and perfect simultaneously. Her first official act was establishing a fund for women and families in crisis. using town resources to ensure no one had to make desperate choices out of pure survival. The fund provided temporary housing, job assistance, and support services. "You're institutionalizing kindness," James observed. "I'm making sure what happened to me can't happen to others, at least not here, not while I have authority to prevent it." On the evening of her 50th birthday, Clara stood on the porch of their settlement home, now the mayor's residence, watching sunset paint the sky. James was inside entertaining grandchildren, Rose was preparing dinner, and the town Clara had helped build hummed with life and purpose around her. She thought about that 17-year-old girl standing in the mud, being traded for livestock, believing she was worth exactly what her father said she was worth. If she could speak to that girl now, what would she say? That the moment you think is the end is just the beginning. That worth isn't assigned by others, but claimed through action. That survival is the first step, but living, truly living, requires building something beyond just yourself. That being treated like property doesn't make you property. That cruelty doesn't have to be perpetuated. That love can be chosen rather than obligatory, and that choice makes it stronger, not weaker. That you can be sold for a mule at 17 and become a mayor at 50, and those two truths can coexist without diminishing either. James came out, slipped an arm around her waist. "Dinner's ready. Rose made your favorite." "I'll be there in a minute." He kissed her temple and went back inside. Clara took one more moment looking at the mountain where she'd learned to survive, at the town where she'd learned to lead, at the home where she'd learned that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. She'd been sold like livestock, but she'd become royalty through the simple, radical act of refusing to accept anyone else's assessment of her value. Her kingdom wasn't grand. It was a mountain cabin and a mayor's house, a husband who'd chosen her for 16 years and counting, a daughter who led with confidence, grandchildren who knew only love and security, and a town that ran better because she insisted everyone deserved dignity and support. But it was hers, built with her hands, shaped by her choices, defended through her absolute refusal to be diminished. And that made her richer than any queen born to a throne could ever be. Because crowns you inherit are just metal and stones, but crowns you forge yourself, from pain and survival and determination and love. Those are real. Those are eternal. Those are worth more than all the mules in creation. Clara smiled, turned, and walked inside to her family. Her kingdom, her legacy, her life built deliberately from the ashes of someone else's cruelty. And it was more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.